Imagine standing on the roof of Africa, surrounded by stunning peaks and massive cliffs. Welcome to Ethiopia's spectacular Simien National Park.
Home to rare mountain wolves and the iconic bleeding heart monkeys, this fascinating landscape was among one of the bird's World Heritage Sites in Africa.
We've gathered the fun facts, history, and essential travel tips for this high-altitude paradise. Let's scale these peaks right after the intro.
Welcome to World Heritage Rookies, the podcast where we explore UNESCO World Heritage Sites one episode at a time. We are Lina
and Ralph, and we will travel alongside you to some of the most stunning sites our world has to offer.
Each week, we dive into the history, fun facts, and reasons why World Heritage Sites matter for humanity, sharing our own discoveries and travel tips along the way.
So, let's dive in and learn about some World Heritage together.
Hello everyone to our 9th episode of World Heritage Rookies. My name is Lina, and if you're here for the first time, welcome. I hope you will find the conversation entertaining.
And my name is Ralph. Hello. I'm going to be your host in a way to today's episode. And if you're a returning listener, thank you very much and welcome back. We hope you enjoy this episode, as Lina already mentioned. Yeah, I might be a bit biased because today it's again my episode. And I have to admit, I think this was the episode where I used so far the most amount of sources to come up with a full picture. So curious what you will think in the end.
Why so many sources? I mean, it's good to have more sources, of course, but I'm really curious of why. It was a little bit harder, the research?
It was a bit harder, and it was also for me, I could not find many sources that by themselves were able to answer all the questions that popped for me up during the research. So
I see. No. That's totally understandable. And I think that we started this exercise where we're trying to imagine what questions the other person is going to do. Because sometimes you do really annoying questions I have no answer. So I always now trying to see what Ral will ask in this section.
That's very interesting because I'm coming with the same approach of, okay, what question could Lina ask? And I do not want to be that and I do not know. Sometimes I will still be, but I'm trying to figure also out in it. So it has become sort of a competition right now. Who can better prepare the other? That's what married life is about. You're in a constant competition, I have the feeling, right?
And just for the record, I'm winning.
Always. I mean, just to make it easier for me, the wife is always winning.
Of course. So let's see if you are answering all my questions today. So, Ral, what are we going to talk about?
Oh yeah, we didn't even mention what's this episode about. Today I am actually traveling back to Ethiopia, something we have visited already in a past episode for the churches of Lalibela. And we are going to Simien National Park, which I think is a good transition already in a way. Lina, what do you know about Simien National Park? Because I have to admit, before I did this research, I had absolutely no clue about Simien National Park.
I am exactly the same as you. I know that it's in Ethiopia, of course, from the last episode. A part of that, it is a park, I'm pretty sure. But I do not have any further information.
Well, then I'm happy that you will be able to learn something, hopefully, in this episode along our listeners. I'm gonna start into the history or a bit of the background information about Simien National Park. So, first stating a little bit to locate it. So, Simien Mountains National Park, as the official name is, it's located in northern Ethiopia. And it is overall known for its very unique and specific landscape consisting of deep valleys, canyons, and also a very specific biodiversity, which I will discuss more in details later. And it is located in the northern Ethiopian highlands. There's a bit of an etymological context, I think that's the correct word. This region, it's traditionally home to the Amhara people, who are an ethnic group that is indigenous to the Ethiopian highlands. And they are, when it comes to the long-standing history, well known for their agricultural traditions and overall rich cultural heritage, which is still associated with this area of Ethiopia today, the Ethiopian highlands. Interesting also, like the name Simien, it means apparently north in the modern Amharic language. But I found a statement from a historian called Richard Pankhurst that notes that the term would mean in the ancient language Ge'ez, which is a language that is associated to Ethiopia and Eritrea, to the kingdom of Aksum. And there it originally meant south, because from the perspective of the ancient Aksumite kingdom and its capital of Aksum, the mountains lay to the south. So that meant that the same word means a different direction just from where the main center of origin is coming from.
But that's how interesting, because it's the same word that symbolized two completely different cardinal points in two different languages.
Yeah, that they're obviously related, but it shows you like how, again, what influence it makes, what is the ruling system or government or whatever, how it can influence. And so it was, since the political and also sort of the cultural heart of Ethiopia shifted more southwards over the centuries, then the word's meaning reversed. Good. Then history about natural world heritage is always a bit tricky because, you need to go far, far back. What I learned about the geological origins of the Simien Mountains range is that it is old, really, really old. So the whole area in the mountain range we find today, it was born originally from volcanic forces. Mm-hmm. And most sources I found, they are saying like the important stuff in a way happened during the so-called Oligocene period, which was 40 to 25 million years ago. And there you had a huge activity of volcanoes, and all these eruptions of the volcanoes, they just covered the whole region with basaltic lava layers that over time got thicker and thicker and thicker and thicker until they reach a thickness of several thousand meters. And when the volcanic activity after some time finally waned off, then the landscape cooled down and hardened into this basaltic rock and left behind a vast plateau of really lava and dormant volcanoes.
That means that the soil today is really rich in minerals, I guess, and is really fertile, because normally volcanic soil with time become one of the most fertilized.
Well, we're still talking here about rock still, so it is limited in a way, obviously, of its fertility. So we know that, like volcanic soil by itself, as far as I know, for a certain time period, is really rich in nutrients. I'm not an expert in geology, so in case I'm sharing wrong information, I'm sorry, but to my understanding, that is. But obviously, here we're talking about a rock that has, shaped over thousands of years. So you will see in the Simien mountain range, you will see plants and natural life, obviously, but it's not like it's a jungle area or anything like that.
I see.
And yes, so after we had now this shaping of the thousands of meters of volcanic rock, over the next millions of years, you had all the natural forces, shaping it that shape stuff in our planet. So wind, water, tectonic shifts, they sculpted this rock landscape into what we see today, which is like a combination of like really specific peaks, ridges, cliffs, and everything that just shows you, okay, what happens when over millions of years you have all these natural elements working on the stone. And the result is what you can marvel at today, this like really cinematic highland panorama, which tells you really about the history of our planet for millions and millions of years. And this is then already like a huge jump in time. So because I have to admit, sparse information I could find about the historical usage of the land is that it's generally assumed that human presence in the Simien Mountains can date back to about 200,000 years, which would actually make it to one of Ethiopia's oldest continuously inhabited landscapes. And as I understood, it's like for over 2 millennia now, even more, the local communities have then adapted really also to the more harsh terrain, especially when it comes to agriculture, because since the invention of agriculture for humans, we said, okay, how do you deal with this? And apparently, like, you have like generations over generations of farmers that have carved stone terraces into the soft mountainside, like cultivating especially hardy crops, because what many people might not think about, it's actually pretty cool up there, like pretty cold, because the Ethiopian highlands, they belong to some of the most high located areas within Africa. I will talk about this in a minute in more detail. But until today, you can find these sort of ancient techniques like plowing with oxen, threshing with different, and making sure that you are cultivating these hardy crops by hand, possibly into stone terraces within the area. You can still find this until today in the rural community and in the villages that you find around this area. And towards the more modern communities that are living within the park, so the national park itself, so the Simien Mountains National Park, how it's called, it was founded officially in the year 1969. It was mainly meant to protect the endemic Walia Ibex, which is kind of a wild goat, which I will also talk about in more detail later, from the negative impact of hover hunting. And as I mentioned also before, human settlement continue until this day within the park. I have also here again found various sort of conflicting data about how the numbers. So apparently in 1994, there was a census of about 15,000 people that lived or farmed inside the park boundaries. Then in a census, as I understood, that was done in 2006, about 3,200 residents across 9 villages were recorded within the property. The latest information that I found was talking about 20,000 people still living in this area, but they still depend heavily on the land and agriculture for survival and livestock grazing.
So I guess, I mean, they are big jumps in numbers. So from 3,000 to 20,000, it's quite a lot.
Yeah, but I guess it could have to do something with the census taken. So it might just be that like when this, so I do not know for sure if they have looked at the same area in census. That's what I said, like the information that I found was a bit inconclusive. But I assume it might have been related to the way the data was recorded.
Errors on the sense. I do have a question. Is this not affecting the conservation of the park? Because we were talking about living communities that use resources, that most likely hunt and
That's actually funny because I noticed this for myself. Like, ask this as a question to Lina. What do you guess might be today's impact on the conservation efforts of this situation? So coming again to the fact, anticipating what the other person might be asking, it seems like I am winning today, my dear wife. Jokes aside,
really weird comment, but sure.
Sometimes, yeah.
So I'm pretty sure it's really heavy in the sense that it is really hard to restrict or limit the impact of living communities inside a natural area. Because, I mean, sometimes, and I see it from maybe a person living in these communities would see in it, it's like, okay, I need another crop. I need to increase my income. Let's use a little bit more of soil. And this will be by 3,000 people, by 20,000 people, depending on who is actually right in the numbers. And then this becomes a huge number.
It is still a challenge today. So as I found out, the conservation efforts, they are trying to balance this. So on the one way, the heritage preservation versus obviously respecting the local communities and their way of living, because it is impacting their way of living. The main things, as I understood, is like first offering relocation, actually. So trying to incentivize people to move somewhere else or offer them alternative places. And also thinking, how can you try to make it more sustainable? So I did not actually found like really details how this is conducted, but I assume you might then try to designate certain areas as off limits for grazing, or you might try to limit the impact that you have on certain areas by making sure, hey, you can use this for this period of time and not. But it is still a challenge. And as I saw from some of the sources that I've been looking at, it is also something where obviously the local communities are, well, what are we supposed to do? We are dependent on this. So there is still a bit of tension and conflict there. And this is also coming then later to the reasons why it is still considered a bit critical at the moment.
I see.
Yeah. But great question, definitely, because this is, as we know, having to strike the balance between making something preserved for heritage reasons, and at the same time respecting the local communities. We will encounter this very often as a friction point for World Heritage sites and their both positive and negative impact they can bring on local communities. Yes, so this a little bit about the historical background for the region, coming now into a few fun facts and interesting stories that I found during my research. So I sort of mentioned it before already, but the area is is often called also the roof of Africa, with the background that Ethiopia actually contains 80% of all land on the African continent above 3,000 meters. Its highest peak of the Ethiopian highlands, it's called Ras Dejen, if I'm pronouncing correctly. It's a little bit more than 4,500 meters. It is the highest point of Ethiopia by itself, not the highest point of Africa. I think it's only like in the top 10. But I think it's important to keep in mind it is really, really highly located, and therefore it is quite cool and chilly actually there. You might, and if you have not been to the region or you are not that aware of the climate in Ethiopia, you might think, okay, it's an African country. It is pretty hot there. Well, in this area, you can have really, really cool temperatures, especially at night. So keep this in mind for later when we come also to traveling. Apart from that, I found one story. Since I found this only on Wikipedia, I'm not 100% sure how true it is. So disclaimer, I mentioned it before because I found it cool, but I had to struggle to track down the original source. So I'm just mentioning it here is that in the highlands, there's apparently a legend of the so-called Genwara trees, which is, as I understood, a piece of local folklore, which was recorded in the early 1800s by a traveler. He noticed that there are small trees that often look human-shaped from a distance, and that the local people are actually avoiding cutting them because they believe that these trees are harboring spirits and perhaps souls that were expelled from humans. And if you leave them alone and do not cut them, they are harmless. But if you're cutting one of those trees, it's said that the spirit that was entrapped with them, they are going to seek out revenge on you and enter the body of a bystander. Interestingly, apparently not of the person who, well, I mean, spirit possession doesn't sound like the nicest fate, but what I found really interesting is it says they will not necessarily enter the body of the person who cut the tree, but just the person who is there. So if you are unlucky and just stand there when somebody decides to cut one of those trees, they're like, oopsie.
How interesting that this is okay, yes, you're going to be cursed, but the actual person that is going to get the consequences is somebody that maybe was just going through. Yeah.
So again, I'm not 100% sure how true this legend is. Again, if somebody who is more knowledgeable than me, I will admit that about this region, please let me know if this is an actual local belief. Another local belief is related to one of the most important figures in Ethiopian Christianity, Saint Kidus Yared, which is telling that the very iconic local goat that I talked before, the Walia Ibex, it was brought actually into the mountains by this saint when he has been using them as pack animals to carry his holy books during his journeys. And this was the reason why they became endemic to this location. Again, that's a local story, but it shows you also, again, the importance that especially Ethiopian Christian saints can play within the history. So we've talked about this a little bit in our episode about the rock-hewn churches in Lalibela, where we talked about how they are still really actively used also for Christian traditions within their countries, but that I also found quite interesting. And last but not least, which will come also to importance later, the Simien National Park, when it was first established, only about 136 square kilometers large, but recognizing the urgency to protect its most iconic endangered species, especially the Ethiopian wolf and the Walia Ibex, it was later expanded to cover about 412 square kilometers. But if you know how the process for UNESCO works, you might know perhaps in advance what I will discuss later. Could you imagine it? Or you are at the moment not sure what I might be talking about, that how this could impact that originally it was only 136 square kilometers and now it's 412 square kilometers.
Well, what I know is that it's really common, and we had talked already in other episodes, how UNESCO, the UNESCO organization tried to expand their territory in order to make it even to invest more in protection in a larger area. So I guess that it's exactly the case in this in the park.
It is in a similar approach. So jumping a bit to it is actually why you will find Simien National Mountains also on the tentative list at the moment of Ethiopia.
So it is not.
Because part of the World Heritage Site is the original size of the park, the 136 square kilometers. But since it has by now tripled more than its size to more than 400 square kilometers, it is not reflecting these boundaries at the moment for the UNESCO World Heritage Sites. So this is really interesting because the park has been expanded since 2014, but it has not been harmonized yet with the World Heritage status. So this is why the boundary modification is at the moment still an ongoing process within the whole UNESCO World Heritage topics. And this is why you will find at the moment Simien National Park also on the tentative list of Ethiopia.
What a special case, because that means that it is a World Heritage Site, but because the size of the park, it's so different to what the size of the original was subscript, let's say. Now it is this weird status of like, it is a World Heritage Site, but it is not yet a World Heritage Site.
Exactly.
Fully, let's say.
So what it means is like you can be in the park and like just officially speaking, when you're moving through the park, you can be moving from an area that is officially designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And then you're still in the park, but you might not be officially on a World Heritage Site anymore. Which I found very interesting, and it's showing a bit also about the bureaucracy, obviously, with the process for UNESCO. I understand that you have to make sure that it's adequate, but I found this very interesting because also like, wait, why are there two Simien National Parks associated to Ethiopia? Because why is there one inscribed in 1978 and the other one is on a tentative list? I did not understand it until I did my further research then.
What interesting. It will be really interesting to see if there is any other cases like this.
I'm quite sure there is. I mean, like you had so many cases where afterwards modifications were made. And I mean, we will also talk about World Heritage Sites in this podcast where modifications are being made and borders are extended. So it is for sure that this happened to a lot of places in the past. It was just now for me the first time that I encountered this, especially this situation right now. Okay. On the actual list and on the tentative list. Interesting.
Really interesting.
And that is a good transition to the next section. Why is it a UNESCO World Heritage Site? So, usual question. How many criteria does it meet, do you think?
Well, it cannot be more than 4. We know that. So I will say because it has the geological aspects that it's really old. So I would say 2.
Yep, spot on.
Always hit it on.
Are you sure you're not just looking up before the episodes that you are pretending, oh, I do not know, but
I swear I don't. So I'm just rational person.
No, you are. No, I'm obviously happy for you of getting all the guesses right there. Jokes aside, yeah, you're absolutely right. It meets two criteria. First one is criteria number 7, the exceptional natural beauty, what I described before, like with this whole really interesting and fascinating mountain landscape shaped by millions of years of erosions. It has like just a really unique look and feel. You will hopefully be able to see a few pictures that we are going to post on our Instagram at World Heritage Rookies for our companion post, where you can find some supporting visual material, especially alongside the episode. Marketing again nailed, right? I mean, smoothly integrated into the episode.
We're being smooth, as you can see.
Yes, absolutely smooth. But yeah, and some highlights that you will encounter within the national park are, areas like cliffs that are as high as 1,500 meters. So this is extremely peaky, obviously, when you think about it. It has apparently is apparently home to the longest waterfall of Ethiopia that has a height of about 500 meters. It is also, as I mentioned before, home of the highest peak of Ethiopia and the highest mountain. You will see, because of all of this, a really, really interesting combination of sort of alpine mountain beauty and rugged cinematic vistas that are allowing you to look like really wide and far to see this different kind of landscapes. And it does also include some forest, grasslands, and vast plains, because as you can imagine, going from these different levels of height, also the whole natural landscape changes a lot. Yeah, and apart from that, it is meeting criteria number 10, the biodiversity and wildlife protection. So, as I mentioned before, the main reason for founding this whole area was the protection of the Walia Ibex, this really specific endemic goat-like animal. And it is until today a really important location to protect threatened and especially endemic species. Because you can imagine, it is fostering endemic species because it's so isolated and it's very unique in its height and level of altitude. And today, like more than 20 species of large mammals and about 130 plus species of birds live there. You have few endemic small animals and endemic bird species, and you will also find various plants that might just be there. So I recorded there officially more than 1,200 plant species grow in the park, and 3 species occur only in the Simien Mountains National Park. So this is the wildlife protection. And some of the most iconic, so I will obviously not go through all the animals you can find there, but alongside the most iconic species, you have, as I mentioned before multiple times, the Walia Ibex, which is sort of a wild mountain goat that is endangered, and it's really found only in this area, nowhere else. And it is known for its very impressive backwards curving horns. And as you can imagine, so for a mountain goat, its agility and grace for going over cliffs. And they are apparently living on an altitude between 2,300 to 4,000 meters. So, and they are really, really graceful apparently when they are navigating the whole highlands.
Really? I have to watch a video. I think so, because goats in the mountains are one of the most entertaining things to see. So I'm pretty sure that a lot of people visit also the park just to see from a distance, I hope, a really good distance, a safe distance, the behavior of the goats.
If you're lucky enough to catch them, because it's not so easy to see them. So it's endangered, and obviously as wild animals, they might be shy towards you. Mm-hmm. But I know what you mean, because also in Europe, during the Alpine region, we also have mountain goats, obviously different ones, but it's so fascinating when you see them. I saw them so far, obviously only in zoos.
Jumping.
Yeah, but when you see them jumping around and how they're able to balance on tiny pieces of rock that like any kind of human, apart from someone really experienced, would probably just like fall down. And this is something that I also find very interesting. If
you ever want to entertain yourself, I recommend you to watch on YouTube like mountain goats hiking. I think that you're going to be entertained by 4 hours.
That is definitely, goats in general can be super entertaining. I mean, goats are awesome animals,
They are
be they
really
mountain
awesome
or normal
animals.
goats. Yeah, next to the Walia Ibex, you have also the Ethiopian wolf, or sometimes called, interestingly, the Simien fox, which is considered the rarest canid. So canids, I think, are like wolf-like beings, so like wolves, dogs, and everything else belong to this section, as I understood. And also, this species is just endemic to Ethiopia's highlands. It is a specialized rodent hunter, so focusing on animals like mice and rats. And it has, for this reason, it has a really elongated muscle or snout, I think is also the like long limbs, and it has a striking red coat. So this might be the reason why it's called also a fox, even though it is, to my understanding, technically speaking, a wolf. Yeah. And the estimates are that at the moment only about 400 to 520 individuals remain in the wild. And they are apparently across 6 isolated mountain ranges. So it's a really, really rare species, even harder to find than the Walia Ibex.
I see.
Then another iconic one, which, as I understood, you will not have that much trouble to find when you're visiting the highlands, is the so-called Gelada monkey. It is oftentimes mistakenly called also the Gelada baboon, because it's strictly speaking not a baboon, but it is a primate also that is very unique in the way that is mostly focusing on eating grass. And it's also sometimes called the bleeding heart monkey because it has a bright red chest patch. So when you will, I'm quite sure, research some of the pictures afterwards and also for the companion post, you will understand how it earned its nickname. And they are quite famous for the part because they are known to form enormous social groups. So I learned that sometimes they can be up to 1,000 individual monkeys. So which
social animals.
Yeah, really social animals, apparently considered to some of the largest primate aggregations on Earth. And they are apparently pretty common and approachable within the national park. So it is most likely that you will find some of those monkeys when you're visiting. And they are also quite approachable in a way that they will not directly shy away from you. So this is also something that I found quite interesting. And apart from that, another famous animal is the bearded vulture, or what I also found interesting, apparently its English name can also be Lemmergeier, which is actually a German word. And this is a huge raptor, so a hunting bird that has a wingspan that is over 2 meters, and it's famous for eating bones, which it will do. It will drop large bones from a height of 30 to 40 meters onto rocks to crack them open, and then afterwards access and eat the marrow. And additionally, as I mentioned, it's also home to some other species of monkeys. You can find leopards there, hyenas, jackals, ravens, and other kind of animals. But I think if I would go into detail now to every animal you can find there, it would extend this episode even longer than normally. And I'm now curious for you, which of those animals that I just described would you be most interested to see, or excited to see if you were on a tour in Simien National Park?
I mean, the goats is always a must, but I will say I'm quite interested in the wolf fox-like. I think that's something I would like to see, especially to understand why they are called like a tiny fox or like a fox.
The Simien fox, yeah.
The Simien fox. Though I also am quite interested in the simians, because I found them really interesting, and I think that it's really cute that I mean I want to see their hearts.
The Gelada monkeys.
The Gelada monkeys, not simians, sorry.
Yeah, I think personally I agree with you. I would be most interested in the wolf, understanding that it is super rare. Again, here coming back to this YouTube video that I watched, that woman was lucky enough to see both the Ibex and the wolf actually, and has included it into her video. And I think the reason behind its name as a fox is really just because it has a really striking red fur and it seemed like a fox. Yeah.
Interesting.
Definitely. So then a little bit of status updates about its development as a World Heritage Site. So as you can imagine from the description I had before, it was for a time on the endangered list, exactly speaking from the years 1996 to 2017. And this relates to your question before, okay, how can it work together with the living of people there and at the same time being it a national or like a World Heritage Site? So it was added to the World Heritage Endangered List in 1996 because, well, we had a declining population of the Walia Ibex, which are the iconic animals around there. You had, because of the usage and loss of biodiversity, you had expanding human settlements, overgrazing by the herds and the stock animals of the people around there, and also the impacts of new road constructions, which is, as we know, sometimes a negative effect you might have with increased tourism to World Heritage Sites, that also the infrastructure to accompany these tourism is then, increasing. Yeah.
Site.
Nevertheless, in 2017, it was removed from the danger list after really multiple and strong conservation actions from the Ethiopian government. One of them being the boundary expansions that I talked before and the habitat protection efforts to ensure that especially the population of the Ibex, for example, is kept under control if possible. But still, this website that I mentioned before, the IUCN World Heritage Outlook, still classifies the park's conservation outlook as significant concern, mostly because of still human pressure on the landscape. So you still have communities that live there, that lived there long before the park was created. And obviously it's going to shape the ecosystem because, as I mentioned before, still their livestock is going to use the area for grazing. You will have agricultural expansion when people need more food. You will have farming inside the park boundaries. And what is also a challenge is that there is still the risk of regular fires within the countries for land management because, very often people will use fire in order to prepare them for farming area. And this is still something, especially when it gets out of control, that can pose a significant danger to the whole park area. And obviously you would hope that this can be managed over the time, but it's definitely a challenge around there. Still, as a bit of a positive outlook, is that by today's understanding, both the Gelada monkeys and the Ethiopian wolves, they show a stable population thanks to this dedicated monitoring and conservation efforts and also the extension of the park areas. Unfortunately, the Walia Ibex still has a decline in its population. So it's currently assumed that compared to the last measurement, there's about a 13% decline, which is, linked. Concerning. And it will obviously be further observed. And this is one of the reasons why it is currently assigned this status. And and as I mentioned before, the whole topic of infrastructure construction and power line constructions to advocate for the living areas around there can also influence. So still not super critical at the moment, but something to keep an eye out for. And yes, this leads me then to the last section, which is talking a little bit about travel tips and insights.
How to travel. I'm quite interested because I think that as a natural park, the accessibility normally tends to be a little bit difficult. And I've seen other cases or World Heritage we already have talked about that are quite hard to be accessed by tourists. So I'm quite interested about this section.
It is. So as a bit of a, let's say, basics. So regarding the best seasonality, it's generally assumed that you should try to explore the Simiens between October and May, because this is when the weather conditions are still better. You should avoid the rainy season, which is apparently from June to mid-September, because it can turn stuff around to really, really muddy, or it can make the rivers dangerous. And for example, also I learned that some or all campsites within the park, they close from June to August due to safety concerns. And as I mentioned also before, cold. It can be really, really cold up there. So the Simiens, they are one of the few places in Africa that regularly receive snowfall And especially the nights above a height of like 3,500 meters are extremely cold with like frost coming in the early morning. So if you go there, bring warm layers like jacket, hat, gloves, and really something that keeps you warm, because for the majority of the time, if you're traveling with India, you will be camping. And you do not want to be cold by camping, let me tell you. Good. Then, as you mentioned, how to get there. So it lies in northern Ethiopia, about 900 kilometers from the capital of Addis Ababa. My apologies. The next major city is Gondar, which you will probably then go there via domestic flight. And then from Gondar, you will have to travel about 110 kilometers to a place called Debark, which is a market town that serves also as the administrative entrance. And you need to start your trip actually there in this national park office in Debark, because there you need to purchase your park entrance permit. You cannot purchase a permit actually at the park itself. So this is really, really important. Your starting point will be this town called Debark. And then afterwards, you will organize your logistics and have to drive further like 14 kilometers to the official entrance where the treks normally will begin into the park.
There is a lot of companies organizing this kind of tracks, or it is something that normally tourists do by themselves?
You cannot do it by yourself, because every visitor entering the park for trapping, you must be accompanied by an official park scout who will be with you during the whole time. They are carrying weapons with them, so rifles, like often Kalashnikovs. Why do you think they do that?
I hope it is not because there is hunters all around. I will expect that is probably because the animals that we mentioned before, they don't seem to be aggressive in any way. So I don't think that it's because of the animals itself. I would say it's because of the hunters.
It's actually a combination of both. So as I understood, there have been no major incidents actually in the park. But it is first like to make sure you're protected in case of thieves or hunters or poachers, theoretically. There is dangerous wildlife. So I mentioned it in a side sentence before, but there are leopards, there are jackals, there are hyenas. So they are also supposed to protect you from the wildlife. Also, what is a positive side effect? It is ensuring employment in the region. So you will have a lot of people who, next to their, let's say, normal life as farmers or anything else, might then act as those scouts, and it's ensuring work for the local community. So this is also what was very often said. This is probably the main benefit you have from this activity. So the scouts are necessary, guides are optional.
I found that really interesting because, I mean, what you say is not that there is a precedent of like violence or like you being unsafe in any way, but it's really good to have the in case of scout. So what do you mean guides are not necessary?
You have just really an arm gun, like they has to accompany, but like you can theoretically, as I understood, you can walk by it yourself, but obviously you should have somebody that is experienced, that keeps you informed and that knows where to go. So as I understood, like the majority, if you go around there, like a typical trekking team should have like the mandatory scout, a guide. You might also have a chef who will then accompany you then for like ensuring food in the different camping areas, because there are camps throughout the park where you can stay between the nights, because especially if you take longer trips, you will be multiple days in the park. And also mulemen and their accompanying mules that will carry all of the equipment and food for you while you're trekking in the park. So this seems to be like a typical combination of like a good party to travel into the park. And you can decide how long you want to stay. So as I understood, most travelers, they will spend about 2 to 3 days in the mountains, but longer treks are possible. So especially if you want to go to the highest peak, Ras Dejen, it typically takes around 4 to 6 days. If you want to be there only for 1 day, you can do this also like as day trips, but they are obviously less immersive and you can see less things. So there are apparently some lodges that are inside the park is one, as I understood, and also one like really close to it where you then can just go for day excursions. But within the park itself, you can like travel each day between different basic campsites. To give a bit of a insight, so like price range, if you go for a 4-day trek, they will cost you about $1,000 with everything associated. For a really long 9-day trek, you may pay up to $3,000, as I understood from my research.
I do not think that that's expensive, because you are talking about having a person for security, having maybe a person that is going to help you to carry the stuff. You're going to have a person that is going to cook for you. I think that already having 3 persons accompanying your group or you as a traveler, it's quite good. I mean, that means their salaries do not range really high.
Yeah, I agree. What kind of thing would you be interested in? You think, like, would you prefer only like a day trip excursion, or would you go for the full hiking experience to the highest summit?
I mean, honestly, if I'm traveling there, I will be for the full experience. I will go for at least, more than 4 days for sure, between 4 and 5, 6 days maybe. Because otherwise, honestly, doesn't make sense. I think that also what you say, like it is really hard to see some of the endemic animals, and having only 1 day really reduces the probability of you actually seeing them.
Yeah, I agree. I think I would probably, for me personally, I would prefer something like a 2 or 3 day trek, just because we have mentioned I'm not the biggest fan of hiking, and I just know myself after 6 days of hiking, I'm just gonna be like, ugh. But I guess that's a personal problem. So, and you are right in experiencing the majority of the
also,
whole part.
Ral, everybody's going to be made by somebody else. This is a little bit like luxury kind of hiking and trekking. So come on.
Okay, got it. If we're going to the highest peak. I understood. Yes. Then apart from that, like just some things to keep in mind when you're visiting. So obviously it's an environmental protection zone, so keep it safe. So no littering. Do not touch or remove any of the plants. Do not disturb the animals around there. And for God's sake, do not do anything that could cause a fire, because as mentioned before, that is a really, really big problem still until today. And also what I mentioned before is it is a really high area, so between 2,000 and 4,500 meters.
Use warm clothes,
but also think about altitude sickness. So this can be really, really challenging and cause shortness of breath, headaches, nausea. So try to get some information beforehand how you can mitigate this. From my own experience, when I went to more high locations, like, okay, take it slow, drink a lot of water, try to see perhaps if it makes sense to have 1 day before to acclimate to the region. But again, check with somebody who might be more professional about this. And again, mentioning multiple times, bring multiple layers of clothes. It can be cold.
Me coming from a really high city, always remember that you shouldn't be doing a physical activity at least 12 hours after your arrival. This is the bare minimum. I'm pretty sure for the park, they are specific recommendations. So please check that out before. And do not go directly to track in the first day that you arrive.
Yeah, then you will just be like, bloop, and then like your whole trip might be cut short anyway, because you're just...
Don't take the risk.
Passing out, and last but not least, the national park is also a good location to combine it with some other UNESCO sites that are in the area of Ethiopia. So what I already mentioned now multiple times, the rock-hewn churches of Lalibela are accessible. Apart from that, you can also experience Gondar itself, that I mentioned before as one of the starting points when you are getting there. Gondar is also actually designated as a World Heritage Site, at least one of its parts, the Royal Enclosure or the Royal Complex. And also you can find the ruins or the historical complex of Aksum, which was, as I mentioned before, the capital of the Aksumite Empire. So these are, if you're interested in combining World Heritage Sites, some of the trips you can perhaps tackle afterwards in your grander Ethiopian tour.
That sounds great, actually. And I think that it makes sense because normally you wouldn't just go for a trekking of 6, 7 days. Normally you would try to see more of Ethiopia. And I think that doing the tour and having some days in prior to the visit to the park, it's something that you should definitely do.
I agree. Yeah. And this was it about Simien National Park, something I think both of us didn't really know anything about before we did the research. What are your thoughts?
I really think that when we started this project, we always focus on the historical World Heritage sites, and we had visited many of them. But I think that I'm getting more and more interested in natural World Heritage sites, and Simien National Park seems a place I really want to go.
Yeah, I agree. And it's again coming the problem. It tells you just too much about, okay, where do you want to go? And now with the combination of having talked about Lalibela and Simien, like, okay, so we have to go to Ethiopia. Obviously, again, at the moment there is a little bit of political instability. So as always, before you're going to a place, check out also what is the travel advisory from your home country. But that should not keep you from enjoying really. We have a friend who recently went at least to Ethiopia, and from the pictures that he posted on Instagram, I was like, I want to go there as well.
He has an amazing life. So if you ever hear us, shout out to you. You're doing great as well.
Yeah, you know who we're talking about when we were mentioning like this.
So, the only thing that we can say is always go. I mean, try to go to these amazing places. There is a reason why they are World Heritage sites, and it is only possible to really see in it when you visit by yourself.
That's true. And yeah, that was it from my side for this episode. Next week, it is again your turn, Lina. Some hints or some insights what we're going to talk about?
We're going to jump back to Europe. That's something I can tell you. And it's going to be actually a little bit of a longer episode because this place has a lot of history. Shout out to Europe. And quite looking forward. And also looking forward to see you back. So thank you so much for joining and see you next time.
Thank you. Goodbye.